Hello and welcome back to HEMA Fight Breakdowns. Today I'm going to be breaking down the gold medal saber match from Helsinki Longsword Open. Now, normally I don't do saber matches, but of course our number one fan of the channel, Sam Riles, is the winner of the gold medal match, spoiler alert, and I wanted to break it down not just because he is in it and it's the best that an American did at this tournament, but also because it is, in my opinion, a masterclass in controlling the pace of a fight. Now, pacing a fight is something that people talk about in the terms of boxing or MMA, but they don't really talk about it in terms of HEMA. I think a lot of ways because a lot of people don't like to talk about the overall context of a fight as being the collection of exchanges. They instead like to focus on individual exchanges and what happened in them, and that includes myself. So while I'm going over this fight, I'm going to talk about what I always do, which is what each fencer is doing and why they might be successful or unsuccessful in doing so. But I'm also going to talk about pacing the fight and what Sam Riles specifically did, and not only in terms of trying to win an individual exchange, but trying to win the fight overall and how each of those decisions impacted what he ended up doing and what ended up succeeding. So for our first exchange, we have the normal feeling out period, but it is not so normal in this case because Sam is doing something very unorthodox. He is coming into measure and doing a whole lot of big, flourishy, provocating moves. Now, normally this is something that most people won't do because they are scared of creating an opening right off of the initial bat. But in my opinion, this is a really smart thing to do while outside of measure because it allows you to get a very good feeling on what kind of fencer your opponent might be. Say, for example, your opponent is an extremely aggressive fencer. The second the ref says go, they run straight to the center of the ring, they see whether or not you run at them, and then immediately upon seeing that you're doing these big flourishy motions, they say, oh, there's a perfect opportunity. They wait for you to miss or make a big gesture with your arm, and then they attack. If that was the option that Sam's opponent chose here, Sam, I imagine, had something ready to go. Given that he was out of measure, it can be a great method of provoking your opponent into attacking outside of measure and maybe getting a nice parry riposte off. Similarly, if they do what Sam's opponent actually did, which is move to the center ring, watch these big flourishes, and don't really do anything, what you can pretty safely say is that they are a defensive fighter. And this isn't to say that it's a bad thing to be either aggressive or defensive in either of these situations. It's really more about controlling the pace of the fight. By getting this information, Sam knows what kind of options he can use later on in order to overcome his opponent's offensive or defensive nature. As for the exchange itself, it's actually pretty simple. Sam's opponent comes into range, tries to throw a cheeky little undercut that might have been going for the body at first, but due to the position they were in, really only hits the leg. At the exact same time, Sam stabs him in the face, getting a nice 3.2 point differential, which gives 1 point to Sam. So now into our second exchange, Sam is finally going to utilize the information that he gathered in the first exchange, knowing that his opponent, Pontus, is defensive, and starts immediately going for the cheekiest possible hand snipes. Normally, this can be a very risky thing to do against a very aggressive fighter, but as we established earlier, Sam knows that Pontus is not very aggressive, which means he can freely throw these hand snipes and wait for one to land, while he also simultaneously waits for Pontus to try to get a very decent parry off, at which point he will probably throw a riposte. But if you throw really shallow and really properly distanced hand cuts, it's actually really difficult to get a proper parry off, because a proper parry often requires your opponent to overcommit. By putting your strong onto the weak of their blade, you can often get a nice riposte off because you're better structured in your parry, but it also means that you're at a distance where you have to similarly commit the same amount that your opponent just did. By not committing very deep with these hand shots, Sam is able to very easily get back out of range every single time one of them misses or gets parried, meaning that the follow-up response from Pontus is just as likely to be out of range and very, very tippy as the things that were coming towards his hand to begin with. However, of course, Sam, who's doing a very good job of controlling his distance, manages to get a winging little hand shot off of to Pontus's arm, which gives him another free 2 points. But this is a very critical juncture here, because going from 1 point up is not really a whole lot, but now being 3 points up means that he is able to theoretically double out Pontus, even in such a way that Pontus will continually get headshots or body shots and only give him 1 point. 3 points in this rule set is really hard to make up. It requires a clean head or hand shot, and in the world of Saber, that's a pretty hard thing to come by. So our next adaptation comes from Pontus here, and he recognizes that he was being a little bit too defensive in the first and arguably the second exchange, and now has completely changed up his game to be much more aggressive. Of course, Sam has counter-adapted to this and shown exactly what he had probably planned to do if Pontus had been aggressive from the very jump, which is these big, flowy, showy motions are actually just a disguise for the fact that he will throw a big cut to your head every single time you take a step forward. And this is probably a very particularly good idea right now, given the state of the fight, given that Sam is up 3 points to 0. If he manages to hit the body or the head every single time in these next exchanges, he will simply win. There is absolutely no way in this rule set, if you throw an afterblow to the head or the body, that you can ever lose a point advantage. So it is a good strategy, but it's not actually the strategy I think Sam is actually going for here. I don't think he intends to simply double out his opponent over and over again. What he intends to do is to make sure that if Pontus wants to get overly aggressive and not go for these parry riposts, he is going to have to get through a attack towards his head. So if he attacks aimlessly, simply walks into measure and throws something either low to the body or even high to the head on a very hard offline, he's going to get hit. So in order to get into Sam's range and in order to get those clean 3 points he desperately needs, he actually needs to do a stepping parry. And this is going to become very, very important in the next exchange, even if it is very short. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the previous exchange was a double, and you would think that there's not a lot of information to be gathered off of that. But one piece of information that you know Pontus has to be thinking here is, I absolutely need a clean parry riposte to the body or the head to get my clean 3 points and get back into this game. So the best adaptation that you can make to this situation is exactly what Sam does here, and that is blitz the guy. So coming up from these previous exchanges, Sam has always maintained his distance, thrown showy, flourishy moves, and never really indicated to Pontus that he was going to be aggressive in the initial action. So by completely changing things up here, he does two key things. One, he puts the onus on Pontus to parry riposte, knowing that he's going for a parry riposte by throwing a big ballistic cut right over the top and trying to wedge it over the top of a parry. Sam drastically increases his chances of managing to hit the head or the arm in a bad parry, and that's more or less what happens here. But at the exact same time, it's also important to note that when you're up on points, being aggressive can be a really, really great way to shield yourself from any kind of parry riposte that might come over the top. So if the idea here is that the score is the complete reverse, 4-1 in favor of Pontus, doing this kind of big, showy, ballistic attack in the opening motion would be a pretty bad idea, because you're basically guaranteeing that you're going to get hit in an afterblow and probably not make as many points. So this is what I mean when I say you have to control the pace of a fight. You have to be able to analyze what kind of exchange you need based on the score that it currently is. Just because your opponent has been defensive for a while, you might think that going in for a big attack might be a good idea, and it might be, but only if you are in the situation where those are the kinds of points that you need. Because Pontus needed his parry riposte, he became even more defensive than he probably would have liked to have been. And because Sam was up on points, and because of the rules as they are written, he probably became significantly more aggressive in this exchange than he normally would. Either way, it became a really great demonstration of how you can make your determination of what you're going to do, not just based on what you think is going to work, but what you think is going to work for the fight overall. Now, our next exchange is our longest, but also probably one of the least interesting. We basically see Sam go back into measure, do the exact same kind of flourishy moves that he's seen before, register that Pontus is now being defensive once again, and starts throwing those cheeky little hand snipes. And while it takes a while for them to land, we can see once again that Pontus is still stuck in this parry riposte mentality, and he is unable to get a decent parry and riposte off of these little hand snipes that Sam keeps throwing. Now, unfortunately, the director or the judge walks directly in front of the camera at the very last instance, so it's a little hard to tell exactly what happened, but for me, it looks like Sam threw a cheeky little undercut to the bottom of the hand that is the exact kind of thing that is very, very hard to parry, because you can't really just point your sword down and use your sail guard to protect the bottom of your hand and then meaningfully come back with any kind of riposte, given that you're probably not in a very good range, and if you do a very large lunge and thrust, which probably makes the most sense from that situation, chances are you're not going to be able to reach your target far enough. So it's a really great demonstration of what we saw again from the second exchange, where Sam understands that if you can throw these probing strikes against someone who has no recourse but to respond, eventually one of them is going to land. So at this point, Sam is now up 7-0, and as I stated earlier, in this rule set, coming back from 7-0 is basically impossible. So it's at this point that I have to give Pontus an immense amount of credit, because in most situations like this, people would just kind of shut down, give up, and let what happens happen. But not Pontus. Pontus comes forward with the greatest adaptation I've seen to this situation probably ever, because he comes forward in his same defensive posture. He still uses his footwork to move in and move out, into range and out of range whenever it needs to happen. He still is waiting for Sam to try to overcommit, but he has changed his guard, he has changed his positioning, and instead of just waiting for these hand shots to come out, he is slowly inching forward, using his footwork to back Sam into a corner, and then, at the very last moment, makes an absolutely wonderful bit of timing, where he waits for Sam to go for one of these hand shots after he's backed him up, and instead times it so the second this little flourish misses, or this little hand shot misses after he pulls his hand back, he leaps into a cut straight to the head, which manages to get through the parry of Sam. Now, normally this would be an accomplishment just in and of itself, but on top of that, he manages to pull it out and manages to maintain that same distance after getting his scraping headshot, and manages to parry a follow-up cut as well. This is something in the world of Saber that is very, very difficult to pull off, and is only possible because Pontus, despite the fact that he is losing right now, had a perfect read on what his opponent Sam was going to do. He knew that if he backed him into the corner, he would probably get one of those probing hand shots again. He knew that if he waited for it to miss, he would have a very small window of opportunity to throw something of his own, and he knew that even if it landed, he was going to have to parry an afterblow of some kind that was there to try to diminish the points he could get. He got the perfect 3-point parry riposte that he had been looking for this whole time, even though it wasn't really much of a parry riposte, it was really more of an attack. But the point here is that Pontus got exactly what he wanted, and he has put himself back into striking range of this match. Now, our next exchange is another short one, and another good move by Pontus, but unfortunately, it only results in him getting 1 point, which, of course, puts it at 7-4 rather than 7-3, and as you can see by the timer, Pontus is running out of time to try to make this comeback. The matches here only run to 3 minutes or 10 points, which means that Sam is in 2 different paths to victory here. He can either get a clean deep target, or he can just wait 30 seconds for Pontus to not make a clean decision, and he's going to win regardless. So Pontus, trying to do the exact same kind of idea that he had in the previous exchange, is continually closing distance, trying to back Sam back into that corner, and get that hard read on whatever it is Sam is going to throw instinctively, and his attempt to parry riposte. And he almost gets it. He's advancing forward in this high hanging guard, which basically tells you that the attack that he's looking for is a descending cut onto this side that's going to glance off of the strong of his blade, at which point he can throw his cut around and get a clean 3 points. And it's not a bad strategy. A lot of people love to throw those one cuts directly out of instinct because it feels the most safe and it feels the most defensive. But that is not the cut that Sam throws, unfortunately. Instead of throwing the one cut, he throws one around the middle and manages to hit Pontus in the arm. At the exact same time, Pontus executes his pre-programmed parry response and hits Sam in the head. Now, this, again, is a good option. 9 times out of 10, this kind of adaptation would be extremely praiseworthy because, again, it results in a high target versus a low target, which almost always in every rule set results in points for you. But it's not enough. In this rule set with the 3-point, 2-point differential, this kind of exchange is not nearly as beneficial as it is in other rule sets, like a 3-point, 1-point, or, whatever other kind of rule set you fight under. Even a 2-point, 1-point is a little bit better, because despite the fact that you only get 1 point, being able to get 3 points off of a clean, deep target is so astronomically better than getting 1 point off of a deep, shallow exchange. So, despite the fact that Pontus does everything right here, he comes out just a little bit short with only 1 point and still finds himself in a real serious predicament. So we come now to the final exchange, and unfortunately it is the final exchange in what is obviously an awesome fight, and we see another adaptation from Sam here, though in a lot of ways it's really just the same application of the pace setting that he has been trying to do this entire fight, just in a slightly different way. So up until this point, Sam has been trying to keep Pontus at bay with snipey little hand shots, making sure that if he stays defensive, he's going to get his hand sniped and he's going to lose 2 points. So Pontus adapted by continually walking forward and looking for those stepping parry riposts. So Sam does something that is very, very difficult to simultaneously step forward and parry, which is he turns his saber sideways, uses the curve on the inside line to get around a parry and stab Pontus in the chest, at which point Pontus can try to afterblow him in the head or the arm, and he doesn't look like he quite makes it, but at the end of the day, it wouldn't really matter. The timing was basically up already. Pontus only had one option to win or to get a lot of points, which was go for a clean, deep target. And at the end of the day, even if Pontus had managed to completely parry this thrust offline and get a beautiful headshot, he would have gotten 3 points, which would have put him to 7-7, and this would have gone to sudden death. There still would have been an option for Sam to completely dominate the pace of this match. And while it is, again, very important to point out that everything Pontus does is correct here, it unfortunately happened too late. It happened too late into the fight where Sam was already up 7-0, and it just wasn't the kind of rule set where you can come back from something like that easily. So, unfortunately, Sam gets that clean, deep target right to the body. I say unfortunately as though I wasn't rooting for him to win the whole time, but Pontus comes away with a 10-4 loss and a really great fight. So, if there's anything you want to learn from this fight, and you don't do Saber, recognize the kinds of strategies that Sam used to set the pace of the fight, and recognize the kind of strategies that Sam used to maintain his lead, and put them into your own tournament fencing. It might feel like sporty bullshit, but if you are not paying attention to the score, as it currently is, when it comes to making your decisions and your adaptations, you will end up making the wrong decisions and the wrong adaptations, and you will end up in a negative feedback loop, which is, of course, the concept that I explained in my last video. One of the problems of doing HEMA in a tournament is that at the end of the day, the tournament rules set the course of victory. If you are not paying attention to the course of victory set out for you by the points, you are not going to walk down the path of victory, and you are going to lose, and you are going to feel bad, because losing while doing what you feel like is the right thing to do is the bit of cognitive dissonance that makes everybody hate tournaments. It makes all these people write these extremely annoying paragraphs in my comments about how tournaments are stupid and lame and not martially valid. The reason they think that is because when they go to a tournament, they do everything they think is right and they still lose. And if you want to avoid that cognitive dissonance, that voice in your head that says you actually suck and tournaments are bad, this is how you have to play the game. You have to play it as a game. You have to look at it as a point in time, and you have to make your chess-like decisions based on what you're going to do, not just based on what you think is valid, not just what you think is going to get you that clean point, but based on what kind of points you think you can get away with based on the points as they lie. You got to play the game. So, if you don't like that, the comments right there, write a big paragraph. I won't read it. But if you want to see more stuff like this, I will be back next Tuesday with another video.